much for joining us today. My name is Samantha Hewitt, and I am a Senior Manager of Growth Marketing here at Telgorithm. I'm based in Los Angeles, California, and I primarily have a background in social media and marketing. I was most recently at the Walt Disney Company, where I was working on games and interactive experiences before joining Telgorithm in May. I'm fairly new to the telecom industry, I think it's fair to say that. But if there's one person who is far from it, that would be our co-founder and CEO. And fortunately, my speaker today, Aaron Alter. Hi, Aaron, how are you?
I'm great. How about yourself? Thank you, Samantha, for taking the time to put this all together. I know it took a lot of work. It's greatly appreciated, and we're excited about it.
I couldn't do it without you, truly. Thank you for being here as well. I know we've been waiting for this for a while, so very excited.
Yes.
So Aaron, you're pretty well known in the industry, but for those who may have not met you before, can you give us a little personal background?
Sure. So I reside out on the West Coast in LA right now. I'm originally hail from a place called New York City, where I grew up, a Yankee fan. A little bit about my professional career. In the early 2000s, I started working for a little bit lesser known company called Verizon Wireless, back in the days when there were these things called flip phones. I ended up working there for about 8 years, all the way to the days of when smartphones started. I then took a role at another company on the East Coast that kind of sold VoIP technologies, or voice over internet technologies. I kind of learned about carrier relations and carrier services. And then over the last 7 years, I worked at a company called Service Titan as their head of telecommunications. They are one of the leading CRMs servicing the home services industry. I was in charge of their telecom stack. And then last year, I actually served a role in another company called SignalWire as their director of telecommunications, kind of got a view on the provider side of things. But all in all, been in positions throughout my career and met quite a few different folk to kind of give unique perspective and to be positioned to understand and make some significant and positive change to the telco industry, which is what really excites me.
That's awesome. Yeah, very extensive experience and just a few well-known names in there. As far as Telgorithm goes, this is our first of many webinars. Could you, share a little bit about the company?
Of course. So just to piggyback off of my intro there, throughout my experience, throughout different parts of the telco industry, I noticed that there was a lot of tape, particularly during my tenure at Service Titan, serving as the customer of the cloud communication provider. Things as simple as having reliable text messaging services or even voice services were not that easily attainable, or at least from a stabilization perspective. And it got me thinking, and it got me poking around to figure out what are the nuances, which are pretty complex, and what are ways that things can be done better to make telco attainable for the many cloud communication platforms that exist today and that are popping up every day. And we founded Telgorithm, one, to make this easier, not only for the developers at such companies, but also for the product managers and the go-to-market teams, because that matters a lot as well. What are the things that they need to know about upfront, rather than just signing up for some trial account on a website? So we founded Telgorithm to make it easier and make telecommunications, cloud communications, particularly attainable for SaaS providers, and also to provide transparency. We care about the bottom line, and we know about that bottom line because we served as a customer for many, many years and have been on the opposite side of that stick. At the same point, in my role at that I just prior to founding Telgorithm that I came off of at SignalWire, kind of gave me a perspective from the provider side, which really puts us as a team, and we've actually collected a team of folks that I met throughout my career, a unique position to be able to we believe properly serve customers and their bottom lines. And throughout this webinar and our future webinars, you'll see the way we position things and the way we've gone about things and the way we created things have been about just that.
Awesome. That's perfect. Well said, and very true. The reason we're here today is exactly that. We're here to talk about and take a really deep dive into a hot topic in our industry, as you and I know well. This is throughput throttling for A2P 10DLC text campaigns.
Can you repeat that again backwards?
Not backwards, no chance, but I'm getting it forwards pretty well. Throughput throttling is something that our team has been extremely passionate about. Aaron, as lead of the charge here, for bringing awareness to, because what we've been seeing is that more often than not, messaging API providers are often mismanaging this. And we find this concerning, and we do have solutions for that. So if you have questions throughout the discussion, please send them through to the chat. We will address as many of them at the end of the webinar as we can. If we don't get to them, we will reach out to you directly, so don't worry. But Aaron, we've got a lot to talk about, so why don't we go ahead and dive
Yes.
in? Where do you want to start? Can you talk about A2P messaging?
Sure. But before we talk about A2P messaging, which is just a silly acronym, if you will, to most
Okay.
people, let's talk about P2P messaging, another acronym, or text messaging altogether. What is text messaging? When was it created? What was its purpose? So without going too far down the rabbit hole, essentially text protocol was created by the network operators. Those are your Verizon Wireles's, AT&T's of the world. Back in the early 90s, they created this protocol. And what was interesting back then is really prior to that, the only real mode of communication were these, big or at some point small, like a StarTech, a wireless cell phone that was really more meant for voice. And obviously, the network operators are thinking, what if folks can communicate by text message rather than hopping on a phone? And that's still very prominent today, this far and long forward.
Yes.
However, back then, the use cases were quite different than they are now. So for instance, back in the 90s, the internet as you have it today was not as prominent. There wasn't pretty much any internet. Maybe you had a 56K dial-up modem where you were connecting up to AOL on a pixelated screen. But more than that, there really wasn't any cloud like you know it today, other than it raining. And so therefore, back then, the use cases were more of person to person, which is what P2P was, and person to person, meaning that I have a cell phone and you have a cell phone, and let's talk to each other, conversate, have a conversation by typing things out. All right, I type a message, you type a message, and we converse back and forth this way. And that was the only use case back then. And so when the network operators created this texting protocol, which they called P2P or person to person, there was not a lot of throughput needed. You didn't need necessarily a very big highway for that. Meaning to say, I don't know about you, but I don't know if you've tried to physically type out messages, but I've yet to meet someone that actually can type out 60 messages in a minute by hand. And even if you could do that, Samantha, I doubt you're going to be able to conversate with someone properly like that. But
a one-way
still
conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And still in all, the network operators knew this, and they said, you know what, we're going to go above and beyond, because we may not know all the use cases for person to person. And they set the rate at exactly just that, 60 messages per minute or one message per second per number. And this was great. And this is great for that use case. And this was what the protocol and this byway or pathway was created for. And it worked well for a while. However, with the advent of the internet, as time went forward and communication became more cloud-based, you have applications no longer being, installed locally and being cloud-based. The infrastructures behind texting protocol became cloud-based. And you have companies now going back maybe 13, 14 years ago that kind of tapped into this cloud space to make telco more attainable for cloud applications. And you had companies, they were one of the first, but by far not the only, called Twilio and the like, that created APIs that allowed that. The idea was to allow applications to tap into this to offer a communication to their customers. And so they ended up tapping into this person-to-person protocol, which was kind of virtualized at this point. And because they were thinking, and rightfully so, that everyone reads a text message because it became so personable, nothing to install. They're read very quickly, people respond to them. And why would a business that's trying to communicate with its customers want to tap into this channel? And indeed, that's what happened. And so they started to use an application to tap into this channel to send messages to people, to persons. And this worked for a while. However, there's a big problem, and that is that when we get back to that throughput conversation, is you need a lot more. While 60 messages per minute for me conversing with you by hand is quite a bit to match for a business trying to communicate with its mass amount of customers, even on basic use cases, 60 messages per minute shared is actually quite a little. It's very small.
Yeah.
And so businesses, exactly. And so businesses were looking at this and we're thinking, wait a second, one number gives me 60 messages in a minute. Well, what if I just procure 10 numbers? What if I procure 100 numbers or 10,000 numbers? And I'll just blast a bunch of messages over to this end users. And indeed, with the enablement of cloud communication providers, making money from this, they allowed this to happen and businesses started doing this. And like with anything else, when you start to expand on something, then you introduces a potential nefarious play into that. And people started spamming users that did not consent to receive messages, opt in. And then they started to send illicit materials as well. And what ended up happening is the network operators obviously got wind of this because they got complaints and there were actually lawsuits that were filed by their end users. And they first decided to tackle this in more of what I'll call a technical war. There was a technical war between the cloud communication providers enabling these messages to go out and the network operators trying to shield their end users from these messages getting to them and getting in there. And the way they did this was by creating these filters. So they would start to create filters on content, create filters by allotment of messages or by detecting multiple numbers really coming from the same business or same place. And so they started to filter and block these messages. And then the other side of the fence, right, the players that were kind of using the cloud communication providers and the businesses to send these messages were trying to figure out, well, how do these filters work? Every 3 messages, they're blocking this number. Okay, I'm going to procure 30 numbers and I'm going to rotate the number for every third message. And then again, back and forth, network operators filtering got tighter and tighter. And they started to try to get smarter and outsmart this side of it. And again, kind of got lost in the mix over here was legitimate businesses, as many that are joining us today on this webinar probably already know that over the last few years, especially, you have been on person-to-person messaging because there was no A2P, which we'll get to in a second. You've probably noticed deliverability issues, which are really frustrating because you've sent messages not exceeding throughputs and with the right compliance and the right content there, but they're not getting through because these filters on the network operators have gotten so tight to prevent illicit material and nefarious players that it started affecting legitimate businesses. And approximately 5 years ago, the network operators, this is again your Verizons, AT&Ts, all got together and decided we need to do something about this. And so they recognized 2 things. One is with the advent of technology and the internet and cloud communications, there is a legitimate need now for businesses to be able to communicate with their customers properly via text message. However, the current person-to-person protocol that was originally created back in the 90s was created for that, was not created for this intent. And therefore, they all decided they need to create a new pathway for business to consumer type messaging, which would boast higher throughputs. They all recognize that this needs to happen. At the same token, they also recognize that if we do this, there needs to be a compliance source. We need to ensure compliance that all the players that join or go on this new byway or highway, whatever you want to call it, are all compliant and it's regulated. And they ended up finding a company called Calera, which is an Italian-based cloud communication company, who then formed a subsidiary company known as the Campaign Registry. And all the network operators have partnered up with this campaign registry, all the major ones. And as time continues to go on, you're going to see more and more, and this is going to be expanding internationally as well. And one important point I'll make right here is there sometimes is a misconception. Oh, we have a good relationship, whatever that means, with network operators, so we don't have to bother with this. The only source that the network operators have chosen to oversee and regulate this new A2P path as each individual network operator rolls out their path is this one source, the campaign registry. There is no other separate path. That's a misconception. And so therefore, you have to become part of this ecosystem. And this is indeed a new ecosystem. And just a little bit of a timeline on this, in January of 2020, Verizon Wireless launched their A2P path, already again boasting higher throughputs, didn't particularly at that point require registration, which we'll get to in a second, through that regulator. And then you fast forward to March and April of 2021, last year, you have T-Mobile, Sprint, and AT&T launching their A2P, but the difference is they required registration in order to get onto that A2P path. And so one point to point out before I get into kind of fees and some of that stuff is, again, the way this all kind of materialized and came about was not for what I call a nicety. It wasn't just, you know what, things are not working out on person to person. So, we have this nice path here. FYI, you can go on this A2P path, register here, and you'll get better throughputs. The intent was, because there's a lot of money behind this, a lot of time and effort went into this, and they wanted to, and the original person-to-person protocol is not meant for businesses. The idea is to get folks, which by default, you're on person-to-person. It's important to note that, because A2P never existed until now. So by default, if you are a business that's been using a cloud application communication provider, you are on person-to-person messaging unless you've taken a positive action to get on A2P. It's important to note that. And that they didn't do this for voluntary reasons. So therefore, the network operators had to create incentives for businesses and cloud communication providers to coax their customers to switch over to this now new sanctioned business to consumer, AKA A2P, or application to person messaging path. And they did this in two ways.
I just want to point out really quickly, 2020 wasn't that long ago. If that's Verizon was the first to kind of implement this, and then you must be registered. Of course, they have to incentivize, right? Because you're essentially required to be on there, but it just happened, it feels, at least to me.
I think not only to you, but to most businesses, this just happened. Just hearing the word A2P, I'm sure for some just spins your mind. What is this A2P? What is a 10DLC? What is all of this stuff, and what does this all mean, let alone some of the nuances we're going to be discussing today? And whatever the reasons may be that some of this was swept under the rug, you could use your own imagination why that might be by some of the cloud communication providers. But for that matter, because it was kind of swept under the rug and not a lot of detail given out, it is still brand new. At the end of the day, if you think about it, T-Mobile launched in March of last year. That's just really, a little over a year ago. Right. And so this is still all very fairly new. And even on a day-to-day basis, or I'll say at least on a monthly basis, there are constantly updates coming out on A2P from the network operators and from the TCR, the campaign registry, about certain changes. What I will say is that we've been very close with their leadership for a couple of years now, very early on, and that I will say that they have intent and they are listening to everyone, and that they wouldn't necessarily get this 100% right to start with, but they have open ears and they are constantly tweaking to try to make it accommodating for all businesses. But yes, to your point, this is all very, very new, and part of what we're trying to do with Telgorithm and starting with this webinar of many is to, number one, build awareness. Nothing to do with Telgorithm. We just want to build awareness about the kind of the what and the why, and try to simplify it for folks as best as we can.
Awesome.
So that being said, just to continue a bit forward here, so and to piggyback off my prior point, this was not done for voluntary reasons. So they were two ways that they wanted to coax people over. One was by tightening up that filtering that we mentioned before on P2P, person to person, even further. So much so where literally almost no messages get through at all, regardless of content and throughput and how you're sending it. And the other way is by expanding what they call with pass-through fees. So in addition to paying your cloud communication provider for a fee for a text message or a transit fee, you typically now see a carrier pass-through fee. And so as of right now, particularly on T-Mobile and AT&T, you could be paying 3 to 4 times the amount pass-through fee, which could literally blanket even the amount you're even paying for the actual text message if you don't have traffic registered. That's actually true right now. So anyone that's not on A2P messaging today, and again, as I mentioned a drop earlier, if you're not sure if no one on your team has taken a positive action to get on A2P, it didn't just happen. There's a process for that. And therefore, by default, you likely are on person to person, which means your bill has gone up significantly. If you take a look at that, you should. And also, I would take a look at your deliverability. And it's sometimes confusing because your cloud communication provider may not necessarily show an error when you send the message. They may queue it up and send it at a later time. And you may not even get a delivery receipt at all, and you don't even know. You may think your messages are being delivered, and they really aren't. But I could tell you for a fact that the filtering has gone up 20, 30x what it originally was, where it was bad in the first place. And the rates that cost, even if somehow your messages do make it through, are 3 to 4 times the amount, particularly on T-Mobile and AT&T. And why would you be paying such a significant steep fee if the process to migrate over, and particularly in the way we created it and streamlined that, is a lot more efficient, and therefore much more costly for you? And especially in, with what's going on today with the economy, definitely something you want to look at right now, and not kind of wait on this. It's not a nicety. This is a requirement, and particularly if your application and the businesses that use your application rely heavily on using text communication to their customer, this is really important.
Awesome. Let's get into the fees themselves. What are those all about?
For sure. So obviously, to have a regulatory source that's kind of the gatekeeper and maintaining things, there's costs behind that, right? And so therefore, part of the process to getting on or to migrating over to A2P, or if you have net new traffic, just simply signing up straightforward to get on A2P, there is a process where you have to register. And essentially the idea is that every player in this new ecosystem is registered with the regulatory source. When I say every player, I mean downstream, down to the lowest level. So if you're running a messaging application today and you have what the businesses, AKA brands, is how they're referred to in this ecosystem, that are using your application to send communication to their consumers, you are considered a brand, and they all need to register and go through a verification process. The messaging application provider, which should be registering as what's called a CSP, not a reseller, and we'll talk about that also, or a campaign service provider, which is what you actually are, needs to be registering. Cloud communication providers, connectivity partners, aggregators, everyone in the whole chain, down to the lowest level to the highest level, needs to be registered within this new ecosystem. And part of that is because of ownership. They want to know who you are in advance, what kind of business you are, what messages you're going to be sending, and so on and so forth. And therefore, this allows for a cleaner pathway, a cleaner byway. And the positive of this is that you actually have much, much better message deliverability, which is one of the ways, and we'll get to this, that Telgorithm is actually able to guarantee your message deliverability. We're actually the only provider today that we're aware of that actually guarantees message deliverability. But that being said, there's a vetting process that you have to go through. Again, we streamlined this process via APIs and through our partnership directly with the registry. But basically, every brand is $4 one-time fee. You got to provide the tax ID of that brand. They do a background check. And when they do this background check, it comes up with a certain amount of throughput. They basically look at the size of the company, how new your business is, what your relationships are, and things of this nature, and comes back with kind of like a vetted or a score. And then in addition to that, every brand has a use case. Use case in this new ecosystem are what they call campaigns. And so a use case could be, I have a promotion going out on Black Friday. Another use case could be two-way customer communication for, a support team doing customer service through a two-way chat with a customer. Those would be two different separate campaigns. Of course, there is a concept of a mixed campaign. We'll talk about that in a future webinar. But at its most basic level, a campaign stands for a use case. Each individual use case should have its own campaign. Campaigns are about $10 a month. There is something called a low volume use case where you can really go really low in volume and pay, I think it's a $2 fee today monthly for a low volume campaign. But the standard, typical, regular campaign is $10 a month per campaign. And then the third line item here is a little interesting, and that is something called a vetting fee. What is this? So as I mentioned, when you go through this registration process, you're providing certain bits of information to this regulatory source, and they're running a background check on your business. But that's a very basic background check that they're running. And so sometimes you may not get, depending on the history of your business or how old your business is or how big it is, how large it is, you may not ultimately get the throughputs we're going to show on a future slide coming up and what those look like. You may not get the throughput that you ideally want to communicate with your customers with on a given use case. So what the campaign registry did, they partnered with some additional vetting partners. One is called Aegis Mobile, one is Campaign Verify, more for political, that allows you to go through an added type of vetting. And the outcome of that vetting, because it's a more rigorous background check, many times leads to higher throughputs. It's important to note a couple of things in this regard. One is that the $40 fee is at the brand level, so it's at the business level, not at the campaign level. And so therefore, if you're approved for a higher throughput at the brand level, it'll apply going forward to all of the campaigns that sit under that brand. So it's not, you don't need to go through an added vetting at a campaign level per se. So that's one point. The other point is this $40 fee is taken regardless. So just because you're going through an added vetting doesn't mean you're going to get anything more than you already have. So regardless, there would be that $40 fee. And here is even kind of the most important point, which I believe, and that is that many vendors today, many cloud communication providers today actually require you, or I should say, make you pay this $40 added fee. And just to make this very clear for everyone listening in today and anyone watching this, that is not a requirement of the campaign registry or any of its vetting partners. The idea of going through an added vetting is completely optional. And therefore, if your current cloud communication provider is requiring this, you should approach them about this particular subject, particularly if the default throughputs that you're getting are sufficient for what you believe you need for your use cases. You should not be forced to be paying additional vetting fees that are just not required by the regulatory source. So just pointing that out here, not pointing any fingers per se, just check with your messaging provider. But yes, you should definitely check that out and make sure that that if you are paying for it, one, that you need it, and two, and this is the next part, which we're going to get into now or shortly, is that you're actually getting the additional. Imagine you got approved for this additional throughput and you want to use it.
Right.
Make sure your provider is actually providing tech for you that's actually supporting this throughput. It might sound obvious, but we're going to get into that shortly, where that's not, unfortunately, not always the case.
Let's get into it.
Sure, happy to. So again, as we mentioned earlier, the reason that A2P was created in the first place was to give for businesses to communicate with their customers, simply because the throughputs on person to person were not enough, right? 60 messages per minute for an entire business or a use case for communicating between business and consumer is just simply not enough. And I'll actually prove it to you, because why didn't they just create a regulatory source for the person to person path? Why create A2P at all? Just simply have a regulatory source for person to person and make sure to verify all the brands and campaigns there, or you're going to block them, right? Why create an A2P path? So it's actually two different parts, two different components, and it's important to understand that. So the idea of the A2P path is simply one reason they put that in place, is to boast and give businesses higher throughputs without having to procure hundreds of thousands of numbers, and a proper path and a proper way to communicate with their customers in a timely way accordingly. The regulatory source is more to regulate that, to make sure there's no illicit material being sent or nefarious players on that side. And so therefore, each individual network operator, when they were thinking about, opening up this new pathway, and each individual network operator had to create its own path for this, they started to think about what throughputs would be needed for different use cases. And so if we take a look at this slide here, so this slide here is shared to us by the campaign registry. This is not our slide. And this was, these specifications here were specifically negotiated by and come up with specifically what we're looking at here is AT&T. So what you're looking at here is the latest tier guide of throughputs on A2P set forth by AT&T, given to the campaign registry to moderate and regulate this. Now, simple question or quick question for you, Samantha. When I look at these numbers here, just to kind of give a lay of the land here, so all the way to the left on this chart is something called messaging classes. And that, again, is based on your tier level. That has to do with based on that background check we discussed and your vetting. You get put into a certain tier level, and along with the given use case, that then adds up to the thing you're seeing all the way on the right, or the column all the way to the right, which says TPM, and it actually stands for text per minute. Now, I see a bunch of different numbers there. Doesn't all look like the same number, but when I was thinking about this, or if anyone is thinking about this, um, I'm not sure about you, Samantha, but I doubt at AT&T headquarters when they were coming up with these numbers, they just took a bunch of random numbers, put them on a dartboard, and started throwing darts at them, and then whatever number the dart landed on is what they put on this chart. I could tell you to the contrary, factually, that they took a lot of time to figure out brands and companies with this vetting score of this size and these use cases. The ideal throughputs should be X, or this one that's bigger should be Y. And you could clearly see that laid out over here for AT&T, and we're going to look at a second at T-Mobile. And the point that I'm making here is that it's important because you're paying money, as we discussed, $4 per brand, but $10 per campaign. In many cases, you're paying or being forced to pay $40 a month, $40 one time per brand, that you're actually getting the throughputs you are paying to have, especially in today's economy where you want to make sure you're stretching your dollar to every point and level that you can. You don't want to be spending money that you're not going to be able to take full advantage of. And it's important to note that getting less than that amount, meaning having a provider that does not support the full amount, is no good, because that's what you're paying for and you need to have available to use. And on the other side of the fence, having a provider that supports you to make sure you don't exceed those amounts, because if you exceed these amounts, you actually can get your messages blocked, flagged, campaign suspended, brand suspended. So it's important to make sure, one, again, that you have a provider that supports your exact approvals so that you have the ability to send it exactly the amount at a network operator level that you're paid to have, and two, that you're not going over that limit. And again, the point here is these numbers, it's clear for anyone, and you can check with your provider site as well as the campaign registry itself, are not arbitrary numbers. These were put in place specifically with a lot of intent, and therefore you're paying for it. You should be getting exactly what you're paying for. Let's push over to the next slide and look at T-Mobile. So while AT&T took a more of a per minute, as we saw TPM, text per minute approach at a campaign level, T-Mobile took a little bit of a different approach. And what they do is they, through your background check, give you a tier instead of a messaging class. You can see on the left side there, brand tier, where they essentially give you a daily cap. And this daily cap is at the brand level, right? So remember we discussed a brand is one of your customers, one of their businesses. Even if you have 20 campaigns, they all collectively share this same total amount per day, whether it's 2,000 a day, whether it's 200,000 a day. And again, just to highlight again here, the point here is these numbers are not arbitrary numbers. It is important to make sure that you are verifying with your actual current messaging service provider that many times that first of all, you're definitely paying the $10 fee per campaign, but surely if either voluntarily you're paying that $40 fee to get higher throughputs per brand, or you're being forced, even worse, to pay that if you don't want to, but even if you want to, that you're actually getting that amount available to you, and that there's no way you can exceed that amount because you're going to be blocked. So not lower and not more. These are not arbitrary numbers, and these are numbers that you are paying hard-earned money to support these use cases, to be able to properly communicate with your consumers and customers. And that being said, let's shift over to the next slide. And this is another very important point that I'd like to bring across to our audience today, and that is use cases. So many people or businesses might think by default, you know what, throughput sounds nice, but that has to do with, marketing type use cases. I don't really do much marketing today. Most of my use cases maybe are, maybe a multi-factor authentication, or it's conversational messaging. This doesn't really apply to me so much right now. I don't really care about the throughputs. I don't care about the throttling. I don't care about this stuff. I'm not ready to have, marketing messages as of yet.
Aaron, I actually have a question about this. You brought up customer care.
Sure.
You brought up two-way communication earlier. And I was thinking about some of the services I use often, not all the time, like Postmates or Shipped with Target. So I will order something from Target. I'll get a text from the actual person in the store. They'll let me know if the item is in stock. They'll let me know when they're on their way. And we're chatting. It'll be about 4 messages over the course of an hour. I assume that goes in like delivery notifications or customer care. Like I do wonder what does that That's a very light amount of text in that time frame. We're not texting 60, even 60 per minute. So how does that have to do anything with high throughputs?
Yeah, very, very good question and good point. So let's break this down because this is a super important point. You're exactly right, right? When there's a two-way communication, maybe you're sending there's a communication of 4 texts in a minute, right? So I'm conversing with you, I send you a message as that rep, and you're responding back as the consumer. And so therefore, it goes back to that use case we said before, person to person. It's really a person-to-person use case, but it happens to be coming using a cloud communication platform from a business to a consumer. But the use case itself really is person to person. Per se, you would think does not need higher throughputs. Well, here's the important kicker of this. You don't need to, fortunately, you don't need to purchase a separate campaign for each individual customer service rep that's going to be individually talking to its consumer. The great part about this is that the campaigns are per use case. So if you have 500 reps, right, communicating, you would use a couple of campaigns, or you could use one campaign. You can get an approval to put more than 50 numbers on a given campaign, and you would use one single campaign for all of these, for this one single use case across the board, across all these interactions. Now let's run that back again, Samantha. Okay. Imagine I'm conversing with you 4 messages per minute, but we have 1,000 reps and we're all conversing at the exact same time. I doubt it's like the DMV where there's everyone doing it in order. People are doing things concurrently all the time. And so what's going to happen is if you reach your throughputs, whatever level you're at, right? So let's run that through. What's going to happen is you're going to message me as a consumer. Someone else here is messaging their rep as a consumer, and so on and so forth. One person, if you reach your limit, right, and you get capped or you're getting capped and queued at a lower rate, what's going to end up happening is that some rep in that chain is not going to be able to properly get that message to their consumer. And they're just going to be like, wait a second, what happened here? How come no one's responding back to me? Your message could be sitting with your cloud communication provider's queue for who knows how long, waiting till they get to that customer. Now, in customer service, it's a bad experience, but I'll actually take it up a notch. I used to work, as I mentioned at the top of this webinar, I used to work for a company called Service Titan, and we worked in the home services industry. Now imagine your faucet broke or your sewer main broke, and you're waiting a text message from a technician to be dispatched to you. And because you've exceeded that limit, or you're being capped at a certain limit, because you're not being able to take advantage to your current phone provider, your cloud provider, of the full throughputs that you paid to have, then imagine that homeowner is not getting that text message. They're going to freak out. Or what if you're using AAA and you're stranded on the side of the road and you don't get a text message, or you got a confirmation that the driver is on the way, but then you don't get you're not able to get an additional message when he's there, what happened, you don't see him show up, you can't track him because you didn't get the message. These are everyday scenarios that occur day to day that would definitely be impacted by this. And at first glance, you might think, oh, I'm not marketing here, so it doesn't apply to me. Not the case, because all these interactions are all sharing the same throughput within a given and standard use case, even a 2-factor authentication, right? If you have people commonly, right, not everyone loses their password at the same time, right? Or they can, not everyone does, but they can also. If you have millions of users, there could be 2 people losing their password at the same time, and one of them gets it, and the other guy is sitting there asking for, their code to come across, and you could be waiting and just pinging, and nothing comes across. So the idea here is, and the point here is that regardless of your use case, throughput does matter because they are shared across. That use case is shared across multiple conversations with multiple people. And therefore, even if it's not a mass per se marketing campaign going out, you would still be impacted by this.
That makes sense.
And so with that being said, let's talk about a little bit so here's the way that we should think about this. So we discussed that T-Mobile operates in a way where there's throughputs that are done at a daily level per brand. Then there's AT&T. They take a different approach. It's more at a campaign level, and it's more per minute or per second. And then you have Verizon is also more per minute per second in US Cellular. But here's the point. Let's go back to that slide on T-Mobile for a second, if you don't mind, Samantha.
Not at all.
So let's just assume for a second, daily cap, you're approved, top tier, right? You go through added vetting, top tier, you're approved for 200,000 messages a day for this specific brand. What would you need to know to make sure you don't either that you're taking full advantage of this, that you make sure you don't exceed that limit? Because if you exceed the limit, you're going to get flagged or blocked, causing a disruption. Remember, that number, 200,000, applies only to messages to T-Mobile. AT&T, as we saw, has its own chart. That's not included in this total number and should not be mixed together. That's a separate pathway that AT&T created with its own separate throughputs. So what would you need to be able to monitor this so that you don't exceed your throughputs?
You would have to know every single end user's mobile network operator, and you'd have to track them all.
Exactly right. You would need to know prior to sending a text message
that
the end user you're sending the text message to is a user of T-Mobile. And not only of T-Mobile, by the way, any subsidiary of T-Mobile, which they're known as MVNOs or mobile virtual network operators, there are many of them that T-Mobile has, those are included in the network operator total. So it's not just T-Mobile. So you would have to know not only T-Mobile, and this is prior to sending the message, because once you send the message, it'll get flagged or suspended. That's it, right? You're flagged and you got to now go through that whole process to kind of get that unlocked if you can, but that's causing a disruption. So you would need to know how many messages in the last 24 hours, and in T-Mobile's case, we checked it with them, and I'll clarify now so there's no confusion. It's actually midnight to midnight Pacific time. I know different providers are saying different things, rolling 24 hours or Eastern time. I can tell you for a fact, we spoke directly with T-Mobile. It is directly midnight to midnight Pacific time. But again, if your provider that you're using or yourself is not tracking this in advance of sending a message, you will likely at some point as you scale lead into blockages by exceeding that number, meaning the only way to prevent this is you need to know a number of things. One is you need to know the network operator and its subsidiary of the end user you're messaging. You also need to know how many messages were already sent today from this band and its associated campaigns and phone numbers to T-Mobile phone numbers and its subsidiaries as well. So you need to calculate how many were already sent, who, and including, is this next message going to T-Mobile subsidiary? Be able to queue that up so that you're getting exactly 200,000, and that if there's anything that's going to go beyond that, it gets queued up so that it gets sent the following day. Otherwise, you're going to get flagged and suspended. That's exactly what would need to be in place. Either you as a business application platform or your messaging provider would need to be monitoring this. Otherwise, there's no other way to prevent you from getting this. Now, if you take an approach of, I'm just going to take one whole number, I'm going to take AT&T, T-Mobile, and put them all together and cap you at a lower amount, as we discussed before, you're now being capped. So you're paying all this money for your throughput and use case, but you're not getting what you're paying for, number one. And number two is you're not able to communicate with your customers. If you're running a Black Friday sale, your customers might get the message next Black Friday of the following year, not this year. I don't think that would work out too well.
I don't think so.
Right. And so therefore, it's really important to make sure that you're paying all this money for this, your use case needs it, you're getting that exact amount in place so that you can take full advantage of this, make sure you have the best experience for your customer and you're getting your full money's worth in what you're paying for here. And so, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's so much to talk about here, but we are running low on time. So I want to make sure that we get to what's happening in the industry and hopefully a question or two.
For sure.
Okay.
So let's roll through. And for anyone that's asleep, I apologize. But so let's roll through what the right way is. The right way to do this, as I mentioned, is to for your provider or someone to be able to track exactly how many messages were sent already and how many, and exactly who the network operators of the end user you're trying to send a message to. So when we founded Telgorithm, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we founded it with the customer's bottom line in mind. That was the way we think. We think like you guys. We think like the customer because we were the customer. And that's all we know. And so we created a system where we actually do a lookup on the fly, just like I said, before we send every message. This is included in the cost of Telgorithm. We do a lookup on the fly to confirm which network operator this message is going to, along with its subsidiary, calculate out how many messages is brand and its associated numbers and campaigns have already sent, queue it up for you accordingly, and make sure it gets sent out. We do this for all network operators across the board today, ensuring message deliverability. And I'll mention it again, we actually guarantee, I repeat, we guarantee text message deliverability. Today sounds a little bit funny, but if we're going to offer a service, stands a chance we should actually own up to that. We are the only provider today we are aware of that actually guarantees your text message deliverability. There's no other vendor we're aware of that does that today. I'm not saying anything special in that. That shouldn't be special. That should actually be the norm. That being said, what's special about this? And so what we actually thought, this was obvious, right? We founded Telgorithm to provide transparency. What we thought about is there's a registry, there's throughputs. We need to be able to support that for our customers. It's a no-brainer for us. And that's what we built from day one. But as the months went by, we started to notice some of the other cloud communication providers out there, not the case so much. And what do we mean by this? We found that, and again, not calling any logo out by name here specifically, but I implore everyone here today to contact, to check with, read the blogs on their actual provider's website in specific regards to this. They're not even shy about this. They are actually capping you for the most part. So you're paying all this money. Many cases, you're being forced to pay per brand $40 additional for throughputs that they're capping you on. And you may not even be aware of this because they're capping you doesn't mean they're blocking it. It means they're queuing it up. But like we said before, you could be two-way communication between a rep. Someone ain't getting the message, or the stranded driver on the side of the road ain't getting that message. You're not aware of it. I would implore everyone here to actually check the documentation on their current provider's website, and also check with your engineering team. Check your logs. See if the time you sent the message and the time that it was delivered, or if your provider is even sending you delivery receipts, that it actually matches up with the throughputs that they are requiring you or that you have paid for and the additional vettings. And one thing that I will point out particularly here, which you could actually see because it's blatantly posted on most cloud communication providers' website, is T-Mobile. All across the board, even the ones that do cap the other network operators, they actually take the roof off completely on T-Mobile. And again, if you exceed that rate, you're going to get flagged. And the way we know that is because they actually post that. So if we fast forward through here, I know we're a little bit on time here, but if you take a look here, and again, these are just two vendors out there, but for instance here, if we look at one vendor site, Twilio, there's an error here called 323 that clearly states that your messages to T-Mobile will get flagged if you exceed your limits. Does this mean that they're doing a network operator lookup and it's all subsidiary on the fly, queuing it up and making sure you're getting exactly what you pay for? If so, how could you ever get this error? And why did they build a tech in prep of getting an error instead of building the tech to support you in what many times you're being forced to pay? Same thing with bandwidth. We looked at Vonage, others, Cinch, all across the board. We have not found a single provider yet that actually does a lookup for you, which means that you are simply not getting what your hard-earned cash is paying to have, and the experience that you're getting is likely not optimal for what you should have in place. And I would implore everyone today to not take my word for it. Aaron is just Aaron. Look at your current provider site, speak with them, look in your actual logs and check it out. We are the only provider today, and we actually ended up filing a provisional patent on this because of that actually does this lookup for you. We are a connectivity partner of the registry. We streamlined that entire process. And so we don't even see your customer's private information. You go directly to the registry, which is what we'll talk about in a future webinar and why that's important. But we literally know your information. As far as approvals go, we auto import it to your Telgorithm account, which allows us to then literally queue it up for you at exactly the rate that you were approved for without ever have to worrying about either being capped or exceeding that limitation. And so therefore, again, this ultimately affects your use cases, your bottom line, and your money, which are really today hard to come by in today's economy. That being said, let's fast forward to a little bit to the end here, if we can, unless there's any questions, Samantha, now. So we're offering a unique July promotion here. So Telgorithm, as I mentioned, was founded by the customer for the customer, literally. We don't require any monetary contracts. There's no cost to port in your numbers. There's no cost to port away your numbers. You literally pay for a phone number and for the messages you send, and we guarantee the message deliverability. For a limited time, we're offering 1 month completely free. You could send 1 billion messages, send 1 trillion messages. It's on us. Try it out. That being said, It literally takes less than a week to integrate against our APIs. We have APIs that we've made so simple and so easy to integrate with. Literally, the way I like to compare it to is you already have the plug. You're literally unplugging from one outlet. We have the same type of looking out. You just plug it into ours. Very, very little work, less than a week of work. You're going to get your ROI for that because we're streamlining. We've already streamlined this entire process because of our relationship with the registry. By the way, did I mention we're actually hosting the leadership of the campaign registry to talk through some of these points in the beginning of September. So stay tuned for that. It's super fast implementation. We'll even dedicate an engineering resource for you if you need one. You can get going on us less than a week. And what we're not asking is for you to bring over all your traffic at once. Try us out, purchase 5 numbers, port over 1 number and send 5 text messages. Make us prove ourselves to you. Minimal effort, minimal cost. I'm sure many people listening to this have sunk in a lot of more engineering time and product work to things that will provide and have provided much less ROI than a simple, very quick integration against Telgorithm, where you're going to see that ROI, not only on cost, because we offer really aggressive pricing without any actual monetary commits, guarantee your text message deliverability, and have tech in place that's now patent pending that actually cares about your bottom line to make sure you're taking full advantage of the A2P registrations that you're paying to have and being able to communicate with your customer. At minimum, we want to hear from anyone that's seeing this or that's joined us today, just to get simply your feedback, just to speak to you, to see how we can do things right. And that's literally what our team has been built for, what this company has been built for, and what we're all about.
That's awesome, Aaron. I mean, I know that you mentioned at the very top why you founded Telgorithm was in part to help change and better the industry. That's what we're doing here. This isn't about gimmicks. We want you to try our product because we genuinely believe in it. We genuinely believe that it's going to impact your bottom line in a very positive and very quick way.
That's exactly right.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you for getting through that. We will hit all those other topics that we missed in the future for sure. There's a lot to say, but we do have a little bit of time. Yeah, stay tuned. We have a little bit of time for some questions. So let me see really quickly. Okay, I haven't noticed my campaigns being affected by capping or blocking. Why should I worry about throughput now if I'm not even seeing it?
Good question. So I'll actually break down that question with the words I haven't noticed. Just because you haven't noticed it doesn't mean it's not happening. As I mentioned before, I implore everyone here, whether you're in leadership of a company or whether you're in a product manager, check your logs, check with your engineering team. If you're on person-to-person or P2P right now, I can guarantee you've been affected. Your deliverability, 99% has been affected already. And by the way, even if you're in the 1% that hasn't been, your bill amount has definitely 100% been affected. Just to mention, March of this year, T-Mobile and AT&T both have literally 3 or 4x their pass-through fees for unregistered traffic. So your bill, if you're not already on person-to-person messaging, besides the deliverability, has gone up significantly. And in these economies today, I don't think that could be a good thing for any company. So I would strongly suggest to go and take a look at that. And as I mentioned at the top of this webinar, that if you have not taken a positive action or your team has not taken a positive action to get on A2P, you are not on A2P. I can tell you that. And by the way, I'll even add, reach out to us. You don't have to sign up for us. We actually have a tool where we could look up any number for you and instantly tell if it's registered on A2P. We won't even charge you for it. We'll look it up for you just to let you know if it was. Feel free to reach out to anyone on our team of highly trained experts. Our team is all highly trained experts, hand-selected from the industry. We'll look that up for you very quickly, and we can verify and identify for you from the registrar itself whether any given number is actually registered. So to answer that question is, you should definitely go and check, because we're confident you've been impacted likely on deliverability, but even if not on deliverability, surely on cost, which I'm sure everyone here cares about today.
And if this is all true, you join Telgorithm and your deliverability is now guaranteed, you are seeing those ROI benefits immediately, correct? Like the first month, you'll already notice a difference in your billing.
You will absolutely notice that difference right away, both on deliverability. We actually provide DLR receipts. So it's things as simple as someone's cell phone was off because their battery died. We'll actually provide those codes and a clear description actually in your API callbacks, your webhooks, so you could actually run reports on that and see that information. We even show you the carriers, so you can run reports on which carriers were sent, so you could actually track your limits to see how you're tracking in general. That's all included in the cost and price. There's no additional cost for that.
Awesome. So this isn't a new question. This is something we get very often about the integration process being lengthy, perceived as very lengthy. I know you already spoke to it, but is there anything you want to get across about how our integration actually works and how it's a week or less time on average?
Yes. So, and it's good you're bringing this up because again, we at Telgorithm super understand this, and we founded Telgorithm. The whole point is to make this quick and easy. Right. And as I put it before, the example I like to give again is you guys already have the plug. It's already plugged into your current provider. You literally just unplug that plug from one outlet, plug it into ours. It literally takes 2 days of engineering work, one engineer. We write a week, meaning including QA and stress testing. You're set up, ready to go. 2 things. One is our RESTful APIs, easy to integrate with, super easy to use. In addition to that, we actually are just launching a quick snippet where you could literally change a quick snippet of code if you're using a Twilio type provider and using XML, literally a few lines of code, and instantly you're using Telgorithm. And one of the benefits, again, we're going to get into this in a future webinar, is we support campaign service providers, not resellers, which again, many are forced or unaware to registering as resellers, meaning you go directly to the registry yourself. You own your own compliance, and that allows us to automate this entire process for you. You actually get billed directly from the campaign registry. So you could be assured any vetting you pay for, any campaign you pay for, you're actually getting exactly that, what you're paying for, you're billed directly from the registry, and allows you to multi-thread as well. If you're registering as a reseller with some provider today, you cannot use multiple providers. You cannot multi-thread. So something else we're going to discuss in a future webinar, but something else to look into. But yes, to highlight that point, literally it takes a couple days. We're not asking you to send, we're not asking you to send millions of messages on day one. Get a number from us, procure a number, integrate with us quickly, try us out, test drive the car for yourself. And we are confident, highly confident, as many of our customers already are, that this will work for you. And you make us hold us to the bar.
So awesome, Aaron. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I hope this was as enlightening for everyone joining us as it has been for me. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Any final thoughts?
What I'll say is anyone listening or watching this at any point in time, reach out to us. We don't bite. We're a team of experts. We literally founded this company because we truly care about customers' bottom line. And that only means the actual cost of service, but it also means the tech, the service we're providing. That is the reason why we founded this company. And all we're asking is communicate with us, talk to us, ask us the questions, allow us the opportunity to serve you, and you may be pleasantly surprised.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for all of your time and expertise. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate it. If you have any additional questions, if we missed your question, we will reach out to you directly. Don't worry. We also will probably use them in future webinars or content. So you will have all your questions answered. This recording will be sent out to everyone who is registered via email. So be looking out for that shortly. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we really look forward to connecting with you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.